how you might design a family-wide photo sharing app if someone in the family was vision impaired. Hey everyone, I'm Kevin Wei. I'm a product manager at IBM Data and AI. Today we have a mock PM interview with Eliza LaJoy. And before we jump into today's question, Eliza, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I am a sort of a startup person through and through. I've been working in two different ed tech startups over the last 7 years. Most recently as a product manager, a couple years as a solo PM, and then a couple of years building and leading the team at a company called Mentor Collective, which partners with colleges to help them build mentorship programs that balance sort of depth and breadth and help the schools retain and graduate their students more effectively. I've also done tons of interviews on the interviewer seat. We went through a big hiring push in Mentor Collective when we started to grow, and so I've thought a lot about how to assess PMs and talk to them and make sure that you're hiring someone with good product sense. Right now, I'm at Stanford Business School, the GSB, and starting to do some of my own interviews for internships here, and yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Well, we're super excited to have you. And today we're going to be doing a product sense type question. So for this question, I'd like you to tell me how you might design a family-wide photo sharing app if someone in the family was vision impaired.
Absolutely. A really interesting question. I'd like to start then just by asking a little bit more context, if you're able to share it. First, a little more about the family. Do we know anything else about them in terms of the size and sort of sprawl? Like, is this a small nuclear family, a larger extended one? Do we know where they're located? Is there anything else you can tell me on that front?
Yeah, so let's say that they're just a small family in the United States.
Awesome. So then just a couple other quick things. With regards to the visually impaired person, do we have more details about their impairment? Is this full visual impairment partial? Is it a lifelong thing or something that's recently become part of their life?
Let's say that they were a lifelong impaired person and it's a full impairment.
Makes sense. And my last question, this person, the visually impaired person, do we know if they're elderly, like a grandparent type member of the family, or a younger member?
I'll leave it up to you.
Okay, that's helpful. All right. Do you mind, Kevin, if I take just 1 minute? I'm going to take about 30 seconds to take down a few notes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Cool, thanks. Cool. So since you left it up to me about sort of age range for the user in question, I'm going to think about this from the perspective of an elderly family member, maybe a grandparent, since I suspect that that's a pretty common angle for this. And I think it's something that we can really make a difference in the experience of that family arrangement. And all of us will experience that, that role, or, some role of being an elderly user. And so I think that makes sense to consider. So first, I'm just going to think a little bit more, though, about what are the different users that we might think about when building this photo sharing app. It's an interesting one because I'm thinking about the visually impaired elderly user. The secondary or other users are important here. Like, I think often with a tool that's helping grandparents, we might be actually sort of selling or targeting their children or their grandchildren who might be more sort of receptive to new technology, or just looking for those, even if the grandparent might be the one actually using a lot of that technology. So I really want to keep the sort of web of users in mind here. It's almost like a B2B2C, like product to the younger users, to the older users. So I think I have kind of three different ways to think about these users that we maybe could pick from. The first, and they're all kind of defined by like the involvement that the elderly user might have with the rest of the family unit. So I know that often, there's one case where the grandparent might be involved in the day-to-day life of the rest of the family. This might be a grandparent who's raising their grandchildren, or someone who's living in a multi-generational household, or is otherwise very involved in the day-to-day activities with the rest of the family, maybe bringing the grandchildren to school, attending different life events, and everyone's really participating in each other's lives in person. A second case might be kind of the engagement is not happening all the time, but it might be an elderly person or grandparent who comes to visit periodically, or there's like regular in-person touch points between these different parts of the family, and that may be kind of the cornerstones around which these people are engaging with each other, like a holiday, a birthday, things like this. But in between those, they don't see each other, and that's where something like a photo sharing app could be particularly important. And then the third of the three that occurs to me is a case that's sort of familiar to my own heart, and I think to a lot of people right now, which is where the grandparent and the family, the rest of the family, are not able to see each other very much or at all, either because of mobility challenges or just distance or pandemics, whatever it is that makes it difficult for people to make it to each other in real life. So there's really very little or no in-person interactions between the elderly, in this case, the elderly visually impaired person, and their close family members, which is obviously a really tough, I think, situation for a lot of families. So I'm thinking about these three sort of, the first case again being day-to-day involvement, like everybody's in each other's lives very actively. The second case, there's like a middle ground, there's some active in-person involvement, and otherwise there's distance. And then the third case is the most separate, where the grandparent or other elderly users is further away and not able to be there in person with their loved ones. Do those user groups make sense?
So these sound kind of like scenarios where, depending on how much interaction these users have amongst each other, and how would you characterize the goal of the elderly person that we're designing for?
Yeah, so I think it depends on which of those sort of like user personas I choose. I think across all of them, though, my hypothesis, and so I'm likely going to choose one of those and zero in a little bit more, but I think across all of them, I would hypothesize that the goal of the grandparent as well as of the family is to be as involved with each other as possible, to sort of feel present, to be aware of both the big moments and the milestones, as well as sort of the minutia and the day-to-day of those people's lives. And I think that's not only to feel involved and to feel that emotional connection, but maybe also to share it with your friends if you're in, for example, a retirement community, to sort of share that and to tell your friends about what your grandchildren are doing or things like this. So just really having not only an enjoyment for yourself, but access to that information, to share it and to show it off and to kind of make it an active part of your own life.
Yeah, I like that. So it sounds like we want to target. It doesn't really matter if the elderly person has, only holiday touch points, or if they're only able to see their family members, or maybe not so often due to the pandemic. It doesn't really matter what sort of level of interaction they have there, but it sounds like we want to take those people and create an experience where they can be as involved with the family as possible.
Exactly. And if you're up for it, I'd love to focus in on the third sort of persona that I touched on, which is the most separate folks. I think that's where the biggest gap lies. And I think right now in the world, that group is growing. Like it grew exponentially in the last 6 months. It probably that's not going to change anytime soon. So I'd really like to focus in on that specific segment, though I think in doing that will benefit groups 1 and 2, hopefully as well.
Yeah, let's focus on them.
Cool. So thinking then a little bit more to your question about like what are sort of like the use cases or things that persona family unit might have. And I'm just going to think about that for a second.
Okay.
Okay. So a couple different pieces come to mind. I actually think, So one common use that this elderly user, and I'm going to think about it first from their perspective, though again, I don't want to forget about their relatives who are really important here. But I think the first piece is the elderly user might want to share pictures of themselves and their world with their family. So reporting on like what my life is like right now, what cool things am I up to, or maybe even like, what am I worried about or anxious about, especially if this is someone who's been kind of cut off from their family. They might want to, ask questions or get help or sort of, get advocacy from a younger relative who might be able to help assuage any, fears or concerns that they might have about their care, about, what's going on in their space. I know that's a concern I've heard from elderly folks that I've spoken with in my own life. A sort of lighter weight use case, but I think equally pervasive, if not more so, is just enjoying, and I alluded to this, like enjoying pictures of your family and sort of feeling and understanding what's happening in the lives of people that you're not seeing every day in person. I think that's a really huge one. It enriches one's life, and it gives you important information and allows you to check in on people who you care about and whom you love in a way that maybe talking on the phone doesn't do, or the way that talking on the phone is limited. And the last, so that's like sort of taking in information from the family. And then the third is another piece I kind of touched on before, which is like sharing those pictures with others. So if I'm a grandparent, I might want to show my friends, if I have a spouse or partner living with me, maybe they're, these are also their grandchildren, or they care about these folks as well. So I might want to sort of show off and involve people that are around me in person in these photos. So that's an important piece to consider as well. So to sort of kind of recap, like three, focuses that I'm considering here. There's one that is sharing pictures of myself and my world back with my family, my younger family, maybe that could be important. The second is sharing pictures of that family back with me and enjoying those pictures myself and feeling like I'm part of their world. And then the third really is sharing those pictures of my family with others that I do have in-person access to and really enjoying that. And again, as a visually impaired person, I don't want to be impeded or marginalized or feel like a second-class user in the way that I'm enjoying those things. This is incredibly important stuff and very basic. And this is the family that presumably I built. And so I really want to feel like I'm able to be in the center of it, not that I've been nudged off to the side. So I think that's really how I would think about it. And as I think about what kind of like a vision for that product experience might be. I think that what I'm getting at is like, we want everybody to kind of feel centered in the tool, that nobody is marginalized and nobody is forgotten, but we really want this to be designed first and foremost with this elderly vision impaired user in mind. And to basically make it feel like they're present. So if I were to like try and summarize it, it's like bringing your loved ones into the same room with you. How can we make it feel that way? And so everybody is present together. And when we think about the younger family members, that's exactly what we want for them as well, is to really have your elderly relative that you can't be there in person with. How can we bring them into the room using this app? So that's kind of the headline that I'd like to keep in mind when thinking about the features that we might want to prioritize here. But I want to pause there. Kevin, does that all make sense? Do you have thoughts or questions?
Yeah, so this makes sense. I think this is a good vision to start with, and I'm curious how we are going to adopt this to someone who has this impairment.
Yeah, I think a couple of pieces are important. So like I mentioned, I think, so you're sort of saying like, how will we get it to them?
Or how would someone who has this impairment use this? I feel like someone without the impairment, they would be able to enjoy pictures of their family, share pictures, and report on what they're up to in ways that you and I may use this app. But if there's this impairment, we might have to change maybe either the software or the hardware in some ways, and I'm curious how you might do that.
Definitely. Yeah, so this is really interesting because of course there is technology that exists to help, blind folks interact with computers, and that, particularly in the form of screen readers. As well as Braille keyboards and things like this. So we definitely want to design something that is compatible with those technologies, but thinking about my product vision, I don't think that's enough to your point. Like we really want to center it a little bit more. I think there are a couple of different pieces and you're totally right. Like I think when we think about the solutions that exist right now, whether it be like, going on Facebook and following your family members on social media, that's one way that sighted folks might engage. Maybe it's using like Shutterfly or an app or a tool that already exists bless you, or or maybe it's like getting, if for a sighted person, you might get mailed photographs. I know lots of older people have photographs taped up, but none of those solutions work well for our elderly vision impaired user. Even if they have a screen reader, social media site is extremely cluttered and unfocused. Like there's a ton going on there, and that's distracting if you're just trying to look at pictures of your loved ones. And a screen reader describes what's happening on the screen. It does not give you visceral interactions and engagement in a sense of what's happening in your loved one's lives. So I think that's pretty weak, and we should improve on that.
Yeah. So maybe we can pick one of these that we want to focus on. So either the elderly person reporting, or them being able to enjoy the pictures or sharing with others, and talk about how we might turn this solution into one that someone with a vision impairment can also enjoy.
Definitely, yeah. So I'd love to focus on the enjoying of the pictures piece. I think that one is kind of at the emotional core of this whole experience, and that vision is sort of viscerally feeling like you're present in the room with your family on both ends of that. And so then again, returning to, if we're thinking about the tools that already exist to do this, like it's difficult to easily like cut to the chase. Like if you're using social media, that's not so good because you have a million other things distracting you. If you're navigating through with a screen reader, even you're not going to be able to focus in on the information from your family. Obviously, the experience of processing the visual is not happening in the same way. And there's no like firsthand traces of your loved ones in the way that if you see a picture of them or you hear their voice on the phone, there are. So I think I'd like to sort of think about this actually in sort of three chunks of ways that I think we could kind of design an app to set this up. I think the first chunk is logistics, like getting the user set up. Like how can an app be very easy and simple and friendly to someone with a visual impairment so that we can just get them in the app and easily enjoying and accessing images or like artifacts from their loved ones. The second piece is experiencing those artifacts. And I think we can use sound to good effect here to make it more personal, using things, and I'll dive into this in more depth in a second. And then engaging, so allowing them to like respond back and to sort of have a back and forth with their loved ones about those artifacts. So to dive a little bit more into the first chunk on the logistical front. So I think we'd want to make it really easy to set things up in the app and to make it as auditory as we possibly could. So maybe we can allow the younger family members to do something like record an audio welcome to their relative that kind of just like outlines, here's what this is, like we're excited to share with you, and just gives them we could provide like 3 bullets for that person to record into the app, and then they have a very familiar welcome to listen to when they come in. We might also want to allow voice commands from the elderly user to kind of say to the app what they're trying to do. Maybe if we wanted to, for example, organize a workflow around like I want to see all the pictures of Kevin, like I'm looking to like catch up on what's going on in Kevin's life, and maybe we could have a workflow specific to people. And I could just say that I'm looking to talk to Kevin, not to talk to Kevin, to catch up with Kevin in his life. And I could express that verbally. 2 other good workflows there might be like events, like maybe Kevin's graduation is something that I might want to see. And maybe a third workflow could be places. So like if I know my family often like travels to Seattle, I might want to say, show me, let's engage with the artifacts from Seattle. So there's different ways that we could set up that elderly user to very quickly get into the enjoyable parts of the experience and to limit logistical messing around if we could. Does that logistical chunk make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about how it might look from the grandchildren or the younger person's point of view.
Definitely. Yeah, this is an interesting one. Thanks for asking, because they're certainly really important here. I think we'd want to provide a similar workflow for the most part, because we'd want to create parallelism so that people could understand what each other was seeing. So for example, that same set of 3 workflows, we might want to allow have like a visual cues as well on the page. You could see how like search for Kevin, search for Seattle, etc., as well as being able to access those through voice. Something I might add, though, for those other members of the family is something like a progress indicator of what your elderly loved one is doing within the app. So we want to make a very clear feedback loop. Were they able to access things successfully? Are they stuck? What's going on? And so if we could maybe have like a happy path that we would like them to follow, access their first images, engage with their first images, things like this, responded to. And show a progression there. And then we could even like ping the relatives. We don't want to drive them crazy, but if we could figure out what do they care about, like if I had posted, new photos of my graduation, I might want to get a nudge that my grandfather had successfully accessed those. And maybe if he hadn't, I could even get a nudge that's like, hey, Papa Ed's stuck, make sure that he's all set. So I think if we can create that feedback loop, it's important to just ease any anxieties that those younger users might have about their loved one accessing things comfortably and easily.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I like how you're calling out some of the anxiety that the younger folks might have if they're not sure how the elderly relative is reacting or how engaged they are with the app. Did you want to talk a little bit about some of the other interactions that the elderly had?
Yeah, definitely. So thinking then about so we've talked about logistics. Let's talk now about sort of experiencing the images of the artifacts, and then we'll touch on engagement, sort of interaction in a second. So experience. So yeah, I think voice could go a long way here. Images capture one sense of a person, but why not make it possible to share sound clips from important moments in life? So I think we could maybe do 2 different types of sound clips that could accompany a photo. One could be a voice memo that's recorded in the moment. So like if we're taking a picture of you at your graduation, we can say, hey, here we are at Kevin's graduation. Like, this is really cool, cheese, or, whatever it is, silly things that happen in the moment when you're taking a picture, and then have that easily just maybe with like a very large, well contrasted button, or something very clickable and accessible again via a screen reader and via keyboard navigation, which in my very limited understanding is most compatible with technology that blind folks use on the computer. So voice memos is one piece. And then I think, and that's like for the big moments, right? It's like, this is like this maybe when Kevin's name was called when he was walking across the stage at his graduation, like big auditory moments in life, or someone saying I do at their wedding, or people jumping out at a surprise party. There's like special, or the sound that a dog made when you first got a puppy and like it's running around in the yard. Those are momentous, and that's important. And so we can put those alongside images of important moments, or even have them stand alone. I think the second of the 2 like experiential pieces is more everyday, like just being present in the day-to-day of your loved ones. Like, what does it sound like, after that big graduation moment and people are hanging out, in the backyard having a cookout, or, whatever it is. And so if we could have a way to maybe say, we wish that our loved one were present for the smaller moments. Something we could do is have like a nudge to the younger user, maybe they took the big momentous picture, they captured that moment great. Maybe a couple of times later in the day, we nudge them via like a push notification to their phone to capture a casual moment for their loved one, and that can be shared alongside it and associated with both thinking about those workflows from the beginning, like associated with the person, the event, and maybe even the location as well. So this can be accessed by the other user. So really just trying to, again, thinking about that vision, like bring them in for both types of moments if we could, and tying them to those workflows. Does that make sense on the kind of experience side?
Yeah, that makes sense. I like the second one where we kind of make it so that they're at the event, where it's a little less artificial, and it might be just like, hey, random times record something from the audio. and it really makes the elderly person feel like they're there. I like that.
That's definitely the goal. And they could send them back, right? And so that actually kind of maybe brings me then to the third of the three. So we've looked at kind of logistics, we've looked at just experience coming from the younger family members to the elderly user. Now let's also think about how they could engage back. Like that's really important. If we're centering this person, they have to be able to participate. They're not just a passive observer, right? So, one way, if we can think about how can they send, pieces of their life back, and how can they react to what's being shared by their relatives. So one thing that occurs to me is like verbal comments, or, how could you, say like even just the sound of someone going, "Aw," or like, "Wow," or, "Oh my gosh," or whatever it is, and just reacting. Perhaps we could allow that if the person was comfortable, and we'd have to do a little user research, but, if we could even automatically record, kind of the reactions that the user is having in real time. Otherwise, to your point, it could sound a little artificial if you're just like saying "aw" because you would have written "aw." But if we could really record their reactions in real life, and then maybe give them the option to confirm that they want to send that, or we could automatically add it if that ended up being something folks were comfortable with, that they could send that back, and then me at my graduation party, get a nudge, and I can see that my my loved one is enjoying that, and I could send one back to them, and we could have a conversation the way that you might in like a Facebook comments thread attached to an image, for sighted users. We could even do something like audio emojis, if there was some way to like, maybe you could pick different audio emojis to engage with that were correlated with, like if I'm a sighted user, I'm like familiar with like the heart kissing face, but audio, we can put a funny sound to attach to that, and then use that as a more casual and easier vocabulary. Sometimes you don't want to record an audio clip, then there can be some pre-made ones that are still fun and vivid, to send back and forth to each other.
Yeah. It sounds like we want some way for the younger relative to know that the elderly relative has some sort of reaction, just to acknowledge this two-way street.
Definitely. I think that's important on both ends, like to the logistical piece from the outset. It's very important to show the younger users that this is something that the older user is enjoying, because I do suspect they are the ultimate decision maker, but their decision will be based off of utilization by the elderly user. So we want to keep that feedback loop strong, and to keep it as strong as possible, we want to make sure the elderly user feels empowered, and able to participate when they want to and in control. They shouldn't have to. They should be able to sit back and just watch if they like, but let's give them the opportunity. I know some folks would really, I suspect some folks would really prefer that.
Yeah, and it also reminds the younger person like, hey, there's a human, there's your relative behind this app. You're not just like posting it onto your Instagram or something like that. Cool. So I really like how you broke it down to logistics and the experience and the different interactions that we can have. I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about how you might see how we could measure success for this.
Yeah, very important question. So as we've been talking about it, we really have been thinking about kind of two user chunks, right? There's it's kind of the buyer, who might be the younger relative, like a child or a grandchild. And then sort of what I'm thinking of is they're not the only end user, but the other end user is the elderly person. So I'd want to have success metrics associated with both. At the highest level, we want this app to continue to be used. Whether it's like a freemium tool, or whether there's a subscription component, of course, we'd want the buyer or decision maker to decide it was a good investment, if money is involved. And so the way that we do that is utilization by both parties. I think my top priority would be utilization by the elderly visually impaired person, since I believe that this tool would be selected to make sure that they were involved. So it'd be really important, most of all, that person had a high satisfaction, or like a high net promoter score. I don't think I'd measure in terms of NPS, but would they recommend it to their friends? Do they continue using it? So the simplest metric is, does that person build a habit of coming in and engaging with things that are shared? So each time that something is available, how often is the elderly user viewing those materials and engaging back with them, with their family members? On the family member side, I'd want to know how often are they feeding content in there. That's important, because otherwise there's nothing to engage with for our elderly users. So that's a potential pitfall here. If the younger users are already posting things on Instagram, they're posting on Facebook, it's a bunch of work. If this is too challenging and they forget, it's not easily woven into their lives, then the whole system falls apart because there's nothing for the elderly user to engage with. So it's really important for us to be present for them. So I'd really just have engagement steady and sustained. Well, it wouldn't necessarily need to be steady and sustained, but at least around key milestones, and sustained over time in order for this to be successful.
Yeah, that definitely. Yeah, I like how you called out retention there. It's kind of like if YouTube didn't have any content, you wouldn't be able to have anything. It's really similar in this case.
Yeah, and we didn't talk as much about potential integrations here. I do think we could hedge against the risk of no content, like people not putting enough content in here, by integrating with other places where they're putting content already. So if there's an option when you're uploading to Facebook, for example, can you also upload to this app, just to make it as easy and to increase the chances that content is going to funnel in here from those younger folks.
Yeah. Like this is great, honestly, and I think we can stop here, and I can take off my interviewer hat, and again, like this, I really like your answers here. And before I give you my feedback, I'm curious what your self-reflection might be.
Yeah, I think it's such a fun, interesting topic. I think sometimes I have a tendency to go down rabbit holes, especially with stuff that kind of catches my imagination. I think I really had a vivid image in my head of the elderly user. I recently spent time with my grandfather, and I was thinking of him. We've been talking through the glass of his assisted living facility, which is really hard. And so that user was very front and center for me. Whereas I think the buyer persona, the younger folks, was actually not as front of mind. Like you kind of brought that back in a little bit in the questions you were asking me. So I wish I had balanced those a little bit more. Is one reflection that I would have.
Okay.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, no, I think that overall this was a very strong answer. I like how we talked about the different types of users and the different levels of interactability they had. So we have day-to-day people, or day-to-day interactions with the elderly, or maybe just holiday touch points, or maybe not being able to see each other due to something like a pandemic or distance. And I liked how we focused on just trying to make sure that the elderly person can be as involved as possible with the family, regardless of their situation. But we really focused on not being able to see each other due to some variable, right? Something that I really liked in your answers was that you paused at certain spots to give a recap. So you would give the three use cases, or you would give your three solutions, and then you would say, especially over a Zoom call, it's really important to say, hey, like this is what I said, 1, 2, and 3. It's very powerful, especially when it comes to helping to make sure the interviewer understands and is on the same page. And something else that I thought was really powerful was that you talked a little bit about the before and after scenarios of what your solutions would be. So you talked about before, people would just post on Facebook and etc. And after, we talked about the logistics and broke it down into the experience and the interactions that the elderly and the younger relative would have. I really like that. I think when it comes to the metrics, I think we probably should, and I know that we didn't have a lot of time here and it's kind of like just a mock interview, right? But I think it would be a little bit stronger to talk about maybe some guardrail metrics or some counter metrics that you might want to implement. But overall, I really did like this answer, and I liked how you kept in mind. I think in the beginning I had to nudge a little bit, or maybe you were getting there and I just interrupted you, but kind of talk a little bit more about how specifically we can make this into a product for someone with a vision impairment. And you specifically called out things like, hey, if they have this extreme vision impairment like we set up, we want to focus a lot on the auditory aspects, and we want to, if there are any visual indicators they have to click on, we have to make them high contrast. And I think that as someone who's interviewing, or as an interviewee, this just shows that you have empathy and you can put yourself in their shoes. So good job on that.
Thanks. It was fun to talk it through.
Cool. So thanks again for being on today's show. And for the viewers, if you have a different approach on how you'd answer this question, would love to hear what you'd have to say. Thanks for tuning in and good luck with your upcoming PM interview.